2025. Crowded wedding hall. He emerges through the doors like a tear in reality, his suit singed by blue sparks, dust from eras on his skin. On his left wrist, 3 identical wedding rings shine with shades of time. In his pocket, a music box vibrates as if recognizing the place. The screen projects the ceremony, but the image duplicates for an instant. Versions of the same moment with mismatched clothes and decorations. The bride hesitates at the altar, suspended between the impulse to flee and the magnetism of something already lived. The guests back away, cell phones raise a sky of lights. Outside, sirens announce the time police. The light in the hall fluctuates, alternating temperatures as if passing through seasons. He advances with calculated steps, alert for cracks in the floor that the device could transform into crevasses. The music box slips and falls. The melody rips from the bride a memory without origin. The cameras magnify the moment. Suppressed tears, a gesture to the throat, the recoil of someone recognizing an echo in another life. The screen switches from broadcast to superimposed archives. A ball in 1910, a blackout in 1977, an empty beach in 2004. At the bottom, the title appears in English, precise like a stamp. Agents cross the corridor with kinetic gloves and data collectors. He raises his hands to show he doesn't intend to disrupt the balance. The chronoflux on his wrist pulses exhaustedly. Those nearby smell ozone and sea air, as if summers were invading the doors. The bride's mother faints. The groom tries to rearrange the collision-resistant protocol. The protagonist gazes at the woman and offers silent proof. Aligned rings, a recurring melody, the persistence of an encounter that has spanned calendars. For a moment, the room seems to breathe with them, summoned by destiny written many times and erased just as many. The time police form a semicircle. The screen stabilizes. The melody ceases. Suspended, a single question becomes inevitable. But how did we get to this point? The answer doesn't fit in the tumult or the present that tries to maintain itself. It demands a return to small beginnings, the dust of archives, the glow of an ancient hall, the sound of nocturnal waves, the moment when minimal choices changed maps. To understand it, it will be necessary to rewind 12 hours and 120 years, follow the trail of clues and accept that love can be a method, and time, a negotiable boundary. And each test, each shadow, each silence will point to the same center, repeated in different centuries. 12 hours earlier, the city had awakened to the precise normalcy of a calendar suspended in midair. The researcher walked through the silent lobby of the historical archive as if stepping into a museum of controlled dust, checking gloves, keys, and protocols. His desk displayed neatly lined files, neutral-washed photographs, and a spreadsheet tracking objects that rarely escaped oblivion. On his phone, the calendar reminded him of that night's wedding, not as an affectionate invitation, but as an inevitable social event. There was a name on the screen that weighed more heavily than any bound book, that of his bride, the same one he had learned to replace on internal shelves whenever life demanded discipline. The false piece smelled of old paper and air conditioning. In the basement, an anonymous shipment awaited cataloging. Among cardboard, a 1910 portrait emerged with the impertinent clarity of something unwilling to be forgotten. 2 faces danced in faded silver beneath a ceiling of gaseous chandeliers, and one detail defied coincidence. An identical mole in the corner of the woman's eye, the same curve of her neck, the same tilt of her chin. In the background, a musician held a small rectangular box, similar to those that played melodies with a hand crank. The researcher jotted down numbers, cross-referenced, and sought the source. The metadata improvised by donors reduced the world to flimsy labels. Still, the photograph insisted on returning a question that the trained mind preferred to file away. Above ground, the city bustled with flower stations and polished shop windows. The bride posed for final rehearsals, surrounded by family and stylists, and at some point, without understanding, she whistled a sequence of notes that no one recognized, but which made a child turn their head as if sensing an ancient story. The night before, a decaying painting in an antique shop had captured her same profile in 70s brushstrokes, and a yellowed card labeled the canvas with a date that coincided with a famous blackout. Coincidence accumulated like dust where no one wiped it away. Back in the archive, the researcher tracked auctions and inventories, finding a record of a music box reported lost in 2004 on the coast. The system indicated the piece had resurfaced in a recent estate sale. The seal matched a stamp pattern used decades ago and abandoned, a bureaucratic habit that survived like a forgotten match. Examining the wood inside, he noticed microscopic grooves that weren't ordinary wear and tear, but intentional marks, perhaps some kind of cryptic note. His scientific mind reacted with a catalog, not vertigo. He suggested to himself that all pasts fit into probabilities if the scope is broad enough. The groom, a philanthropist regularly featured in the social media, appeared as the patron of a foundation dedicated to preserving urban memories. Among the donors, names were repeated in reports, and one of them coincided with a supplier of experimental equipment for time measurement at foreign universities. The researcher noted the coincidence as curiosity without altering his pulse. False peace endures when it becomes a procedure. A junior agency agent, hidden behind protocols, accidentally opened a public file containing a technical term for chronal anomalies in civilian archives. The word anomaly ignited a corner of the researcher's brain, the same corner trained to ignore noise. He dismissed the intuition as the superstition of a tired archivist. Then he did what he always did when faced with the improbable. He asked for more data. The hours passed with the planned smoothness of a perfect wedding. Rehearsals, flowers, lists, test cameras. The bride alternated between smiling and measured breathing, occasionally experiencing an emptiness that felt like displacement, as if a step were missing on the staircase she thought she knew by heart. Her family interpreted the emptiness as nervousness, the groom as empathy, the vendors as deadlines. When the researcher received confirmation that the music box would arrive at the archive for preliminary examination, something in his spine knew the day was about to bend. The object entered the room in modest packaging, accompanied by a receipt with old writing and a partially erased stamp. As he turned the key to the first mechanical click, the melody rose, clear, impossible to confuse with any other, and traced in the air the same sequence the bride had whistled without knowing it. On the spreadsheet, the time cell froze for a second for no technical reason. The researcher felt the echo of a memory he never had. The city's surface maintained its brightness. Cars arrived at the hall, spotlights lit up the garden. Guests warmed up their best gestures. Peace remained intact on the outside, while inside, the signs lined up in silence. The 1910 portrait, the 1977 painting, the box reappeared in 2004, the patron who financed memories, the feeling of a missing step. Nothing still. Broke protocol, but the structure of the day was no longer horizontal. When the last light in the archive went out, the researcher put away gloves, closed the drawers, sealed the box with a temporary label, and left the building with the practiced calm of someone who believes he has control over variables. No sirens wailed, no doors slammed, no clocks ticked. Still, the air felt pressure shift, as if before a storm. On the edge of night, the world seemed to hold its breath for a second too long, waiting for a tiny gesture that, made at just the right moment, would open an invisible rift between what seemed routine and what had always been destiny. Dawn arrived with the clarity of cold glass. The researcher dismantled the routine like removing parts from a clock, organizing tools, drafts, reports, a sequence of procedures that lent him calm. The chronoflux rested on a metal tray, still marked by microcracks from ancient use. The music box, under low light, revealed tiny lines beneath the enamel surface. The magnifying glass confirmed they were not flaws, but instructions laid out like a trail of breadcrumbs. On another table, the three rings, aligned by diameter and density, formed a design that only made sense when viewed together, as if each piece of metal were a word in a single sentence. The city slept, but the makeshift laboratory in the apartment suggested another time, that of the interval between decision and consequence. On the invisible side of the night, agency protocols shifted like silent pieces. The junior agent updated a discrete panel, maintaining doubt with the obstinacy of someone who senses injustice, while higher-ranking reports prepared containment measures around the wedding perimeter. The hall, in turn, welcomed florists and setup teams with the naturalness of a repeated ritual. Nothing in that place seemed to predict that the same structure would serve to accommodate a collapse of narratives. The bride rested among dresses and velvets, visited by images that wouldn't settle, glimpses of an ancient hall, of a dark alley under yellowed lamps, of a beach where the wind recalled promises no one had written. When the first sounds of morning reached the window, the researcher closed the ring case and strapped the device to his wrist, making sure the stabilizers could still withstand a short variation. Using spreadsheets, he plotted schedules and routes, predicting downtime, avoiding interception points. The music box returned to his pocket with the reverence of an amulet that refuses to be recognized as such. There was no heroism in the preparation, only method. And yet, the method carried a gleam of insistence that reason would call stubbornness and fate would recognize as a line. The afternoon progressed over the city with the punctuality that social events demand. Cars rehearsed their arrival, flashes tested angles, security guards reviewed routes. The groom's foundation discreetly displayed its coat of arms in small details, as if elegantly marking its territory. Documents passed from hand to hand without attracting attention. Authorizations, lists, table maps. In one of them, almost imperceptibly, an ancient seal replicated the same design found on the base of the chronoflux, a coincidence that would seem fabricated if anyone dared to connect it. At dusk, a gust of wind leveled the garden leaves, and the researcher crossed the side gate with the invisible posture of a technical provider. Chronoflux remained silent upon detecting the proximity of interference. The music box stuck to the fabric as if it knew it was in the right place. The hall breathed in his entrance as if absorbing a missing component for the scene to begin. Teams, guests, family, all formed a board that didn't know it was a board. The bride, amid veils and lights, felt a serene weight settle on her chest, the same weight that precedes recognition before a name. The moment the protocol signaled the final minutes, the city seemed to gather its sounds to offer silence to the collapse. The researcher crossed the corridor with calculated precision. The agents took invisible positions between columns. The groom arranged the smile that inhabited newspapers. The music box warmed slightly, the rings reflected drops of light, the chronoflux showed exhausted overload. The first step into the hall no longer belonged to the present, but to a now capable of hosting echoes. The duplication of images on the screen, the brief dizziness of the guests, the flickering of the lamps, everything aligned like gears waiting for only the slightest force to turn. Then the force arrived not as a scream, but as a precise arrangement of objects, memories, and intention. The climax closed like the lid of a box, and the timeline, for a full second, consented. The next day dawned with the precision of a technical compass. In the archives laboratory, the music box became the center of gravity for all hypotheses. Under microscopy, the varnish revealed micro-indentations arranged at intervals that were not ornamentation, but writing hidden in the frequency of the grooves. The conversion of the marks into rhythmic values generated a sequence that, when mapped into coordinates and times, pointed to 3 dates and 3 places that already hovered like ghosts. The 1910 ball, the 1977 blackout, the beach in 2004. The 3 rings, measured by density and spectrometry, repeated the same unusual isotopic trace, as if the metal had been refined by a method that had survived decades without variation. On forgotten tapes from a neighboring collection, a Super 8 reel showed 2 bodies gyrating to a melody that coincided with the mechanics of the object on their table. An ancient, discrete marriage, impossible to classify as staged. When the partial reports circulated among desks and signatures, the reaction came not in the form of astonishment, but in the form of disciplined denial. The Integrity Committee classified the coincidences as statistical artifacts. The Groom's Foundation offered consultants who reorganized the data until it was diluted, and the agency filed a notice of containment, suggesting the researchers' temporary suspension due to the risk of narrative contamination. Colleagues silenced messages, invitations evaporated, and management issued a preventive leave of absence. The bride, amid final exams and etiquette rehearsals, retreated to the refuge of her tasks, trying to tame the vertigo that the old images provoked like invisible currents. The antagonist's public mask remained unshakable. Photographs of children supported by the Foundation's projects filled society pages. Articles praised the wedding's logistical efficiency, and discreet sponsorships emerged at cultural events. The official narrative erected a wall of plausibility around everything that threatened to veer off course. The researcher, now reduced to an address and a set of boxes, felt the geometry of his own life shrink to the shape of a corridor. Still, the sum of the evidence persisted as a figure that, once perceived, cannot be unlearned. On the night that closed, the threat wasn't declared in flashy gestures, but in millimeter by millimeter frictions. The elevator stopped between floors for no apparent reason. The car's dashboard flashed inconclusive warnings. A shadow lingered too long on the other side of the street. On the table, an old newspaper clipping, uncatalogued by anyone on the team, appeared stapled to a recent receipt, crossing dates that shouldn't overlap. The researcher understood he had crossed the line of what was acceptable and that the next terrain would be one of constant friction, where each piece of evidence would exact an immediate social cost. Isolated, surrounded by polished denials and a benevolence that concealed levers, he adjusted chronoflux as if igniting an internal blade. The truth now had form but no shelter. It needed movement to survive the siege. The investigation ceased to be a tabletop exercise and became precise movement. The chronoflux endured short jumps, calibrated like tweezers, and the researcher traced a three-point line that served as evidence, not nostalgia. In 1910, the masquerade ballroom breathed gas and new varnish. The music emanated from a metal cylinder, and the box, similar to its current twin, rested on the lap of a woman with the same appearance and the same posture. Upon returning, the suit's fabric revealed dust compatible with period lighting charcoal and a micro-engraved wedding ring matching the pattern found on the varnish. In 1977, the city plunged into blackout, yielding shadows and static electrical noise. Magnetic tape captured the rhythmic pattern of the melody with typical flaws of the period. In 2004, the beach returned from beneath the sand the laminated letter indicating the exact coordinates of the future wedding, written in ink that resisted salt and sun. In the present, the sum of the traces began to form a network. The junior agent, overcome by his own conscience, sent internal reports that hinted at memory editing routines applied to civilians in cases of narrative risk, with cross stamps from the Groom's Foundation and the agency. The historian, until then an ally, offered chain of custody and independent expertise, solidifying the credibility of the objects. An external laboratory confirmed the isotopic signature of the three rings, a trace of an ancient metallurgical batch replicated anomalously in different centuries, as if the same hand had insisted on remaking the same marriage over time. The cracks in the facade appeared discreetly. The groom's philanthropy was connected to contracts for the supply of time-tracking equipment. Invoices disguised as donations financed modules used in discreet containment. Press reports revealed formal meetings that, behind the photographs, coincided with the dates of anomalies silently archived. The public narrative, however, preserved a shine and composure, a polished surface that resisted any attempt to impose blame. The twist came in the form of an encrypted email summoning the historian for an unscheduled meeting. The meeting, recorded by Chronoflux's passive sensors in listening mode, revealed the silent exchange, a guarantee that a distant relative of hers would remain unharmed in a corrected timeline, in exchange for the researcher's exact location and the confiscation of the artifacts. The betrayal didn't explode. It merely shifted tectonic plates beneath everyone's feet. Hours later, recall orders were issued, containment barriers emerged around the entrances to the ballroom, and a protocol for sanitizing the bride's memory appeared scheduled for minutes before the vows, with the justification of collective good and chronological stability. Cornered, the researcher reduced the plan to a public and irreversible gesture. The music box was calibrated to project, upon opening, the overlapping frequencies captured in 1910, 1977, and 2004, generating a visual and audio mosaic that the agency could not classify as a subjective account. The rings were lined up in a single case with provenance labels, the reports sealed in redundant copies in civilian clouds. The junior agent discreetly positioned retransmission points in the garden lighting, while programmed digital seals would release the documents to the press at the first sign of a blockage. The ballroom, in final preparation, unwittingly became a stage. Carpets, flowers, and lights formed the backdrop for an act that wasn't scripted. The researcher traversed the shadowy backstage area, aware that each step brought the device closer to a zone of instability where failure would be definitive. Outside, social coverage vans heated microwaves. Inside, agents distributed glances that didn't register on spreadsheets. The sky, with the precise color of before rain, seemed to agree with the moment's design. The escalation completed the curve. Allies revealed, accomplices exposed, intention consolidated. All that remained was the frontal collision, the only thing capable of forcing the mask to fall before everyone and restoring to the bride the continuity that had been fragmented. The timeline, strained to the limit, awaited the impact. The entire room became a witness before realizing it was a stage. When the doors opened and the invisible order of the agents formed an arc of containment, the researcher arrived at the designated spot, positioned himself under the central light, and activated the music box with a gesture that seemed like a nod to the impossible. The melody created a topography of frequencies. The screen, connected to hidden retransmitters, superimposed 3 scenes in the same frame. The 1910 ball pulsing in black and silver, the 1977 blackout streaking sparks in the darkness, the 2004 beach repainting the breeze in grainy video. The now-present man received the 3 aligned rings as tactile evidence. Reports appeared in holograms with seals and signatures. The audience, summoned by their own curiosity, ceased to be an audience and became a jury. The agency attempted to interrupt the flow and delayed the projection by half a second, enough to reveal the containment mechanism that kept the bride prisoner of erased intervals. In that split second, she recovered a sequence of memories that weren't dreams. Her face shifted. Her posture found a continuity life had denied her. The groom's public mask cracked first at the corner of his smile and then at the documents connecting him to the memory editions. Philanthropy became logistics of interference. Elegance, a veneer over gears. The confrontation, without shouting, reached the point where denial would be choosing collective blindness. When the melody ceased, the official narrative no longer supported its own weight. The hall recognized the truth as one recognizes a relative who has always been there. The impact spread consequences with the precision of a diagram. The agency, exposed to cameras and digital redundancies, retreated to a non-interference agreement and handed Chronoflux over to a civil guard with academic audit. The groom spent the night surrounded by lawsuits and a ruined reputation, while independent reports reconstructed the backstage of contracts and restraints. The bride endured days of controlled vertigo, integrating memories stitched together with fine stitches. Family members oscillated between relief and mourning for versions of themselves that no longer existed. The city did what cities do when an ancient secret becomes public. It chose sides, created explanations, invented words for what had no name. The researcher, finally out of the narrow corridor, lost the instrument that had brought him there and gained what the instrument alone could not guarantee: a shared continuity. In a symbolic gesture, the two planted a tree on the ground where the 3 eras had touched. Underground, the music box, now mute, returned to silence its rightful place. Time, unburdened by the pressure of correction, became rhythm again, not a shackle. The story ended without a bang, but with a clear line that connected climax to calm, and the message lingered with the delicacy of definitive things. Truth finds its way even when chronology refuses. The audience was left with the question that endures centuries in calendars. If the chance to go back fit in the palm of one's hand, would it be worth rewriting what hurt, or would it be fairer to honor the scars that taught the way?